to the Bruce Lee Podcast, a podcast about Bruce Lee's life and philosophy. Hi everybody, this is Shannon Lee.
And this is Sharon Lee.
Welcome to the Bruce Lee Podcast.
Hey everyone.
Hello. The Bruce Lee Podcast is a podcast where we look really closely at my father's philosophy, break it down, and make it accessible and applicable to your daily lives, and give you some action items and ways to incorporate it into your own life.
Right on.
So today we wanted to focus on one of my father's really more iconic and famous quotes, which is, research your own experience, accept what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is essentially your own.
Yeah, this is a powerful one.
Yeah, super powerful, and we figured that it really was owed its due in terms of discussion. For those of you who don't know, my father really utilized this quote a lot in regard to his art of Jeet Kune Do, but also in his life process as well.
Yeah, this kind of encapsulates how he came up with his own martial art, right? And
Yes.
how he evolved out of what he was classically trained in to create something completely uniquely his own.
Yeah, and I think, just for a second, talking about the way he did it with his art quickly can just illustrate, what the process is, which is, as we know, he decided to break away from traditional martial arts and he really wanted to know what really works in combat. What does my body need to be like optimally to function most efficiently and powerfully in combat? What are the techniques that I should be looking at? The whole thing. And so when it came to that, he did a whole gamut of things, from getting into cardio and weight training and lots of conditioning exercises that people did not do at the time in traditional martial arts. It was really more about horse stance and forms and the actual fighting techniques, rather than building up the body from and all its components individually, whether it was through different types of exercise that then, cross-training that then could inform your ability to render your martial techniques, and also nutrition and supplements and food and all of that. So he was researching his personal body, his personal experience in that way. He was also researching fighting and what made the most sense to him, and looking at other arts like boxing or fencing. He had a grounding in Wing Chun already, and sort of understanding also things like the laws of physics and biomechanics and kinesiology, all of this stuff. So,
Well, also, I look at this quote, and this is essentially kind of the most simple and poetic recipe or strategy that one can use to find their own essence and create something that is uniquely their own. This is what people are striving to do and not knowing how to grapple with it.
Yeah.
So let's break it down, because if there's one quote that you want to, kind of dig into of all the Bruce Lee quotes to say, how can I find my own path in this world? This is it.
This is it. Honestly, these 4 lines, they really are like a recipe.
It is. If you just follow these steps and you kind of do it over and over again, it is the process that will basically light the lamp to your own path, And so let's break it down. So, the context, the posture that your dad is taking first is the very first line, right? This isn't about ego first, where I want to make something new, I want to be a star, right? This is the way a lot of people start. I want to be famous, or I want to do something that people admire me for, right? So that's a completely different posture. But his first posture is research your own experience.
Yes.
Right? Be neutral.
Yes.
Be the researcher. Understand what's going on with you from this neutral, open place.
Yeah, and it's fine, by the way, if you have or don't have a goal in mind. For him, he had a goal in mind. He was interested in researching his martial experience. He was also interested in researching his life experience. What makes me a more effective human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you don't have like, okay, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to know more about, it's okay. You can still research your own experience.
Well, in fact, researching your own experience will help reveal those things to you.
Exactly. Right. So it can be as easy as just taking time to actively notice, what do I like? What don't I like? What gives me that spark? What excites me? You know, what are my interests? Just starting there.
So journaling, noticing,
trying stuff.
Yeah, and also just noticing, what do I normally gravitate towards?
Yes.
You know, if you historically like taking certain kinds of classes, that's something to notice. If you like going to certain places, like, I noticed that I love going to a bookstore every week, or I love going to a garden, regularly.
Right.
Like, that's something that you know that you like, and it's just noticing that. So start researching. So that's the first step.
Yeah, and also notice things maybe about the things you already do as well, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your job, you know, like
what you like to eat.
Right.
You know, how you like to spend your free time. The second you have any free time, if how do you spend that?
Yeah, your relationships, you know, how are they? You know,
who do you get excited about connecting with?
Right. Yeah, so there's lots to look at.
Yeah. So that's the context. That is the pathway. So you're researching. So the second step is accept what is useful. So what did your dad mean by that?
So you start by researching and noticing, and then you start actually pulling out the things that are resonating with you and that are making sense, that are working, and you keep those. You know, by accept, it means, take those things, keep them.
That it's creating usefulness in your life.
Right.
And usefulness is not just functional usefulness. It's broad, right? Like, usefulness is, oh, this brings me joy. This is easy for me to do, and it's fun, and it creates something positive.
Right.
And that positive can be calm.
Yes, right. Like, it just creates an up feeling for me in my life. It makes me happy, it makes me feel nurtured, it makes me feel content, makes me excited, any of those things. And the more that you keep those things and put more attention on those things, those threads can grow and they attract more of the same, So you can make note of those things and start implementing them more and more.
And also accept what is useful to you personally.
Yes, well, this is all about you personally.
Yeah.
This is not about what you think your family wants or what your boss wants or your partner wants or any of that.
And it's difficult because a lot of times we are used to accepting what society wants us to have, or maybe our career is demanding something, and we're just checking off lists of expectations.
And I'll tell you, for me personally, like, as I get older and as I get more, practiced with all of this stuff, it's gotten to the point now where I will notice if sometimes one word pops out at me that's in a conversation or in a book, and it'll just hit me a certain way, and I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna write that down. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, there's something about this that is resonating with me. I may not even know what it is.
Right. It's a clue.
It's a clue. That's right. But I can feel it in my body. And so, when I was younger, it wasn't that sensitively attuned. But now I can be in a conversation and somebody says, whatever, expanded cognition, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? Like, should I research that? Should I look into that? Just whatever,
Yeah, and it feels like, I have that experience too, sometimes it just feels like somebody's taken a highlighter and just highlighted that into like a whole paragraph. For some reason your eye goes, something lights up.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very subtle, and you don't, like it says, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily, like, in that moment.
Right.
But that's when you just, like, oh, that's a breadcrumb, you just, like, write it down. It'll make sense later for sure.
Yeah, or also sometimes with random thoughts that pop in my head, like, you know, we were just talking the other day about gardening and planting stuff around the house. I need to get on that. But I'll suddenly like see a flower or a plant, or I'll just think like, you know, it'd be great to have roses. But like, because the thought popped into my mind, I'm like, oh, this feels like a clue. You know what I mean? It feels like it's something that's sparking to me.
Yeah, and sometimes what gets dismissed is, oh, that's just a random thought,
Yeah,
right? Like,
why am I thinking about that?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, and so we just dismiss it. But if you actually spend a period of time as an experiment just documenting those random thoughts that just pop into your head, you might actually notice that these are clues from your inner self.
Yeah, and I feel like you can jot down all these random thoughts and words and ideas. You don't have to go with all of them, but you can sort of look at them and track them, feel into them a little bit more, and then decide like, oh yeah, no, this is actually makes sense to me. This is something that I want to do, you know?
Okay, so research your own experience, accept what is useful to you, and then the third part of this recipe seems fairly obvious, but reject what is useless.
Yes. So, but sometimes this is hard.
Yeah,
because
really hard.
Because we have a hard time saying no, especially if we feel that there's an obligation. But the idea is, just as you are taking those things that are feeling good, sparking ideas, thoughts, following those threads, it's the same with the things that don't feel good or that are bogging you down or that are, you can feel are just sort of weighing on you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the real negative stuff is easy to identify and get rid of and cut out, but what takes up space is the mediocre stuff that just is dead weight, that isn't contributing to your forward motion as a human.
Yeah.
But it's just like, you know, it's dead weight, like I said, and you just go, I don't really feel that strongly about this. Should I dump it over the boat? Should I keep it? I don't know, like, yeah, this is the moment to like cut that off.
And also, in particular, if you do have a particular goal or project or life work that you're really putting this effort into, a lot of times you'll do research and you'll get a lot of information from experts and things like that, but you don't have to take everything everyone says whole. You can pick the parts that make the most sense to you, that create your special formula. You know, just like with my father and his martial arts, there were certain elements that he liked, let's say, of fencing, like the stop hit. But he didn't take all of fencing and go and put all the moves in. He was like, no, this is an interesting theory because of this. So this part is useful. The rest of this is useless to me for what I'm doing in this moment, the thing I'm formulating. So from a personal, like, cutting through the dead weight, like, you know, going through the clothes closet of your life and getting rid of those outfits you just don't wear anymore, to very technical components, and not being afraid to go like, well, you know, this expert in this field finds all these things to be useful, but for me, I only need this one piece. And you talk about this all the time, where you're like, I went to a seminar and the whole thing was useless except for this one sentence.
Yeah. That happened to me just last week, where I was like at this class, and from the whole moment I walked in, I thought, oh man, this guy's gonna annoy me the entire time. And just the patience of just sitting through it and trusting that for some part of my intuition brought me there. And then sure enough, there's like one sentence, one moment, one exercise, and it's like, okay, this is why I'm here, this is why I came, this is why I had to sit through this whole thing, and this is my like illuminated breadcrumb. Okay, got it. And it's worth it, because if you think about it from like, oh, I just spent an hour and a half going through this experience for this one sentence, and you think, oh, that's not worth it. Like, that's a lot of my time. But, you know, to me, it actually is worth it, because it's kind of like, this is the job of an explorer. This is like, I'm really active in exploring what is truly useful and interesting to me, and it's worth the effort.
Well, and I gotta say, anything that you get in life, however you get it, that sparks for you and is useful, is a clue in the bigger picture of your life, and therefore extremely meaningful.
Oh, and by the way, even the parts that really annoyed me gave me so much information about, like, why is this guy annoying me so much?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this experience that is annoying the crap out of me?
Good information as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm like, I notice that I get really annoyed when I pay for an event and the person is like terrible at time management and not organized and, like just kind of the way that I like to show up in the world and be respectful to, especially people who pay to be somewhere where you're going to talk.
Right. But I think the important thing too is that, like, you can notice that, and instead of like saying, okay, I've identified why this person's annoying the crap out of me, so I'm just gonna, like, focus on that. It's better to then flip that around and go, okay, so what's important to me is time management and being organized.
Yeah, and that I felt myself doing it in the moment, and I thought, some past part of me when I was like a lower vibration person, I would have sat there and complained the whole time and then told the person next to me about how awful it was.
Right.
But, and then what you do then is then you just spread negativity.
Yes.
So you're having a negative experience and then you just want somebody to commiserate and then agree with you. So then you turn to the person next to you and start talking some shit.
Isn't this awful?
Yeah, isn't this terrible? Don't you agree with me about how terrible this is? But in fact, it was just a really great education of like, oh, this is the opposite of my ideal experience and how I would like to enjoy this. And so it's great information for me to make sure that I'm also delivering on this next time I'm speaking in front of a group.
Right.
That these are the pain points of the audience when somebody's on the other side of this experience. So it's such great information. I was so grateful. Aside from the little actual nugget I got, it was super useful to me just to be reminded to put yourself in the place of the person who's like paying to show up to listen to you, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And also, by flipping it around in that way, it's a great way to put yourself into that harmony mindset, where you're not having to like talk smack about somebody and be negative and be annoyed and all of that. You let them be. They're doing what they're doing. Yep. There's no unringing that bell. No giving the talk. But I can take this and turn it into positive feedback for myself.
Yeah, and I can just go into researcher mode.
Yeah.
It's just that, oh, I'm a person experiencing this. Here's what I like. Here's what I don't like. And it's all good information. And this is the exercise of rejecting what is useless without making it into an exercise in negativity.
Totally.
Like what your dad is saying is not to be complaining about stuff.
Right.
Is about just neutrally, like, cut out the pieces that don't speak to you, are dissatisfying to you, but you're keeping what is useful. And a lot of us don't reject the useless. We carry it around for our entire lives. And it does take up real estate. What it does is it doesn't create space for you to then take on more of the things that bring you joy when there's so much space taken up by just the, like, mediocre.
Yeah, for sure.
And then this last, the number 4, like, final magic spice.
Yep.
Add what is essentially your own.
And this is really important.
Yeah.
And the thing that I want to say about this is, it can seem a little daunting. Well, what is essentially my own? What if I don't know what that is, right? But all it is actually the things we've been talking about, right? Yeah. It's what speaks to you.
It's the confidence to believe in yourself, right? Because a lot of us are afraid of confronting our own truth about what inspires us, what moves us, what we really want to do, because a lot of times that, fights against outside expectations, right? And even the track you may be very well on this moment, it's like, well, I've made a decision. I'm in law school. I've got to be doing this, you know, like, because I'm on a track here, like,
Right.
and you can insert whatever you're experiencing, you know, could be something else, but deep down inside, you know you don't want to do this. It doesn't bring you joy, and so it doesn't mean you have to go off the rails right away. What this exercise is, you know, kind of calling to you is really start noticing and documenting and then finding out what is essentially your own.
This whole process is about really radical trust in oneself, in oneself as the divining rod for your own experience. Because I think a lot of times we get a nudge or a feeling or a pull towards something, and we feel it, and we go, oh, but then we start to second guess, we start to doubt, we start to, well, that doesn't make any sense, I don't know what that means, you know, we start to really have doubt creep in. Well, I don't know what this means, why, this doesn't make any sense, I'm just going to stick with what I know, you know? And like I've been doing that myself, even in like, I've been doing this meditation practice where I've been doing these mantras, and you have to do it 108 times. And so sometimes I have my mala beads, and so it's easy, I don't even have to think about it. Sometimes I don't, depending where I am, and I have to keep count. And so I have this whole like process where I keep counting my fingers while I'm doing it. And you get really engrossed in this meditation, and at some point I'm like, oh wait, was that 45? And what I just decided is, I'm just going to trust myself. I'm just going to trust that I've got the right number. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if I don't, whatever, but it's like that. It's like when something, I'm just going to believe that I'm right, you know, and that is so interesting how it's kind of a scary thing. You're like, but what if I'm not right? Well, what if you're not right? Like, what is the consequence of that? But like, same as like, I'm just gonna trust in myself that this thing that popped into my head is of use somehow. I'm just gonna write it down. I'm just gonna follow it and come back to it, visit it, you know?
And, you know, those of you who are listening to this podcast, you know, part of it is because you really admire what Bruce Lee did in his life, right? How did he get there? What was his secret sauce? How did he achieve the things he did in such a short period of time? Well, I mean, this is the recipe.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
4 easy steps.
Yeah. And you know, part of the gift of, you know, his philosophy is that he was able to simplify this very complicated process into these really understandable words.